What makes a man dangerous? Is it his ambition, his genius, his ability to inspire loyalty, or is it the terrifying combination of all three? 2,000 years ago, a man walked the streets of Rome who embodied every one of these qualities. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. To some, he was a savior, a reformer who gave land to the poor, citizenship to the forgotten, and glory to Rome's armies. To others, he was the greatest threat the Republic had ever faced, a tyrant in the making, a man who would stop at nothing until every rival lay crushed beneath his sandals. Caesar's story is not just one of politics and power. It is the story of a gambler who risked everything, his career, his wealth, his family, even his life, on one wager after another. From the moment he refused to divorce his wife Cornelia, defying the dictator Sulla, and nearly losing his head for it, Caesar showed the world that he would never compromise, never bow, and never retreat. Exile hardened him. War shaped him. Ambition consumed him. In the dusty fields of Gaul, he built an empire on blood and conquest, slaughtering tribes by the hundreds of thousands while writing eloquent commentaries that turned slaughter into poetry. His legions adored him, swearing loyalty not to Rome but to him personally. With every victory, his fame grew. With every triumph, the Senate trembled. But the Republic had long memories. Men like Cato the Younger despised him, not only for his politics, but for what he represented, the return of a king in all but name. Caesar's alliance with Pompey and Crassus, the so-called First Triumvirate, gave him the keys to Rome's highest office. But alliances forged in ambition are as fragile as glass. When Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth, that fragile glass shattered. Soon after, Crassus fell in Parthia, leaving Caesar and Pompey as inevitable enemies. The world held its breath as two titans of Rome prepared for war. On the banks of a shallow river called the Rubicon, Caesar faced the greatest gamble of his life: surrender his command and return to Rome in disgrace, or cross the river with his army, an act of treason punishable by death. History remembers his choice. "The die is cast," he said, and with those words, Rome itself was thrown into chaos. From the siege of Alesia to the fields of Pharsalus, from the throne rooms of Egypt beside Cleopatra to the Senate floor on the Ides of March, Caesar's life reads like the script of a tragedy written by the gods. His rise was unstoppable, his fall inevitable. Was he a hero who saved Rome from corruption, or a tyrant who destroyed its liberty forever? Tonight, we step into the world of ancient Rome to witness the breathtaking story of Julius Caesar, general, dictator, lover, writer, reformer, and murderer. A man who built an empire only to be struck down by the very republic he claimed to defend. This is the story of the greatest gamble in history and the man who rolled the dice. The life of Julius Caesar, the legendary dictator of Rome, Julius Caesar, a legendary dictator in Roman history. A brilliant statesman, a masterful military strategist, a man whose actions changed the destiny of the entire world. But he was also the most dangerous figure Rome had ever seen. Caesar faced the greatest enemies of his age and defeated them one by one. He transformed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. The most defining trait in Caesar's character was his willingness to take risks. He was cunning, calculating, and not always as sincere as his public declarations suggested. So what turned a young Roman noble into the destroyer of the Republic? How did one man convince an entire army to march against their own homeland? And most importantly, did Caesar truly wish to save Rome, or simply to seize it for himself? Let us travel back in time to uncover the story of Julius Caesar, the dictator who reshaped the Western world. Our journey begins in 81 BCE. Rome, after 8 years of brutal civil war, had fallen under the control of a general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla. For more than 4 centuries, Rome had functioned as a republic, a system where power was shared among many and no one held permanent authority. The office of dictator was meant only for emergencies, a leader with absolute power but limited to 6 months or until the crisis ended. Sulla changed all of that. He refused to set a limit on his rule. His victory unleashed a reign of terror. Thousands of political enemies were hunted down and executed without mercy. In the middle of this storm appeared a young man, Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was born into an aristocratic family that had lost much of its former glory. Worse still, his uncle Gaius Marius and his father-in-law Lucius Cornelius Cinna were sworn enemies of Sulla. Politically, they belonged to the populares faction nobles who supported the rights of the common people and farmers. Their rivals, the Optimates, were conservative aristocrats determined to maintain the existing order. Sulla was their champion. After the populares were crushed, Caesar's life was in grave danger. Sulla's demand for the young Caesar was deceptively simple: divorce his wife, Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna. To Sulla, this marriage was a dangerous political alliance that had to be broken. For Caesar, the choice was stark. To refuse meant death. To agree meant betraying both his love and his political loyalty. Caesar chose the most dangerous path. He refused to divorce Cornelia. Perhaps it was love, perhaps loyalty, perhaps both. History does not record his heart, but this decision placed him on Sulla's black list. Caesar became a hunted man. Bounty hunters scoured the city, and for months he lived in hiding, moving constantly. When finally captured by Sulla's men, Caesar bought his life with every coin he owned. Meanwhile, his family worked tirelessly to plead for his pardon. At last, Sulla relented, but not without a warning. He is said to have remarked, "In Caesar there are many Mariuses." Even Sulla foresaw the danger in sparing him. Though pardoned, Rome was no longer safe. Caesar chose another path. He joined the Roman army. This was not merely a way to avoid danger, it was an opportunity. In the legions, Caesar would gain experience, learn command, and prepare for the rise that history had destined for him. Every Roman noble was expected to serve in the army, an ancient tradition of a society that revered warriors above all. Caesar was sent to a Greek island to help suppress a rebellion. It was here that he proved he was no ordinary soldier. In one battle, when he saw a comrade wounded, Caesar rushed headlong into enemy lines to rescue him. This act of bravery earned him the Corona Civica, the civic crown, Rome's highest military honor, awarded only to those who saved the lives of fellow citizens in combat. During his years of service, Caesar gained more than battlefield experience. He came to understand the very nature of empire. Rome was no longer merely a city, it was a world. And he was determined to become an indispensable part of that world. In 78 BCE, fortune finally smiled upon Caesar. His great enemy, Sulla, was dead. The door back to Rome, after years of exile, had at last opened. Caesar returned and began his career as a lawyer. Everyone knew this was only a stepping stone. His true ambition was politics. Unlike many who climbed the ladder step by step, Caesar aimed to leap to the very top. Rome at the time was deeply divided. The rich lived in luxury, while countless poor citizens crowded into slums, surviving on state grain handouts. Corruption ran rampant, and though Sulla was gone, his allies still held power. Coming from the populares faction, Caesar believed he could restore balance, but to do so, he needed real power. 5 years later, opportunity arrived, born out of chaos. In 73 BCE, a group of gladiators led by Spartacus broke free from their training school. No one imagined this would ignite the largest slave uprising in Roman history. Within months, Spartacus commanded an army of 120,000 slaves, throwing Rome into unprecedented crisis. For 2 years, the rebels won victory after victory, annihilating Roman forces sent against them. While most saw disaster, Caesar saw opportunity. In the storm of crisis, those who seized the moment could rise higher than ever. He ran for his first elected office, military tribune, a rank comparable to colonel. He won, and soon saw his chance to build his reputation. If he could help defeat Spartacus, his standing in the Republic would soar. The man leading Rome's response was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest Roman alive. Others feared the assignment, but Crassus craved military glory to match his riches. With his fortune, he raised and financed his own army. One day, Crassus caught Caesar gambling illegal for a noble. But instead of punishment, Crassus saw potential. He had already heard of Caesar's bravery and the civic crown. Challenging Caesar to a game of strategy, Crassus quickly realized the young man's sharp intellect. Caesar argued that brute force alone would never defeat Spartacus, whose gladiators were too well trained. Rome's true advantage, he insisted, lay in engineering. Following this logic, Crassus trapped Spartacus in southern Italy by building a 40-mile wall, cutting off escape. The plan was to starve the rebels into submission. A snowstorm allowed Spartacus to break through the siege, but his army was weakened. Soon after, Crassus crushed the exhausted slaves in battle, ending Rome's greatest internal threat. The Spartacus War forged an alliance and a friendship between Caesar and Crassus. Caesar gained two priceless assets, military prestige and the backing of the richest man in Rome. But Rome's politics were never simple. Another general, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great, claimed credit for mopping up the remnants of Spartacus' forces. Pompey was already famous as the young butcher for his ruthless campaigns, and now he styled himself Magnus the Great. Though a brilliant commander, he was also addicted to glory, often seizing credit from others. Between Crassus and Pompey grew a bitter rivalry. Each saw the other as the greatest obstacle to ultimate power. For Caesar, this was dangerous ground. To alienate either man could destroy his political career. Yet Caesar also recognized opportunity. Between two giants, there was space for a third. In 69 BCE, fate struck Caesar a cruel blow. His beloved wife Cornelia, the woman he had once risked his life to defend against Sulla, died suddenly, likely in childbirth. Her death was both a personal tragedy and a political setback, severing his tie to an influential family. Yet true to his nature, Caesar turned grief into opportunity. He staged a public funeral for Cornelia unheard of for a Roman woman. During the ceremony, he boldly displayed the ancestral masks of his uncle Marius and his father-in-law Cinna, both enemies of Sulla. Though still technically illegal, this was no mere act of mourning. It was a political declaration. Caesar was signaling that the cause of the populares champions of the common people was ready to rise again. The conservatives, the optimates, were outraged. Among them was Cato the Younger, a stern Stoic who would become Caesar's bitter, lifelong enemy. But the people loved it. Before the crowd, Caesar not only honored his wife, but proclaimed his noble ancestry, tracing his line back to the gods. He also declared solidarity with ordinary Romans, promising to act on their behalf. The funeral became the stage for Caesar's first great political triumph. Out of loss, he forged momentum. By 64 BCE, Caesar was heavily in debt, owing the modern equivalent of nearly $100 million. To impress the people, he staged grand gladiatorial games, but these only deepened his financial crisis. Only one man could save him, Crassus. But Crassus demanded loyalty. From then on, Caesar would be his political partner, ensuring that every move he made benefited both men. Caesar gambled that he could climb high enough to repay his patron. If he failed, Crassus could destroy him. The prize Caesar sought was the consulship, the highest elected office in Rome, commanding armies, proposing laws, and presiding over courts. At age 40, Caesar was finally eligible. But there was a problem. Crassus and Pompey were still locked in deadly rivalry. To back one meant making an enemy of the other. Caesar chose a different path. In a secret meeting, he proposed a daring alliance. Crassus would provide financial backing. Pompey would offer military prestige. Caesar would deliver political genius. To seal the pact, Caesar gave his daughter Julia in marriage to Pompey, binding the three men by family as well as politics. Thus was born the first triumvirate rule of three. With this coalition, the republic itself would bend to their will. Backed by Crassus's wealth, Pompey's soldiers, and his own unmatched charisma, Caesar swept the elections and was triumphantly elected consul of Rome. In the election for consul, the highest office in Rome, power was finally within Caesar's grasp. The first triumvirate, the alliance of Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, was ready to reshape Roman politics to their will. The consulship lasted only 1 year, and Caesar knew he had little time. He had to act quickly to fulfill his promises to his allies. The first bill he introduced was a land reform law designed to provide farmland for Pompey's veterans. These men had shed blood for the Republic, yet many now lived in poverty. Pompey demanded land for them as a just reward. Before the Senate, Caesar defended the proposal passionately, declaring that those who fought for Rome deserved Rome's support, but opposition arose. One of the loudest voices against him was Cato the Younger, Caesar's sworn enemy and a leading figure of the conservative Optimates. Cato was eccentric. He dressed simply, went barefoot, and even refused to wear undergarments, claiming to live like the ancient Romans of old. But beneath the appearance of austerity, he represented the narrow interests of a powerful aristocratic faction. Cato fiercely opposed Caesar's land law. He admitted it had merits, but warned it set a dangerous precedent. His resistance was not only political, but also deeply personal. Caesar was rumored to be having an affair with Cato's half-sister Servilia. This enmity fueled Cato's relentless obstruction. At last, Caesar ordered Cato arrested and dragged from the Senate chamber. Though he lacked the authority to imprison him for long, the message was clear: Caesar would use force if necessary. The Optimates hated him all the more. Throughout that year, the triumvirs used every means, legal, illegal, even violent, to push their agenda. Their domination earned them a dark nickname, the three-headed monster. But Caesar's time was running out. A consul's term lasted only 1 year, and he could not be re-elected immediately. Once his office ended, he would lose political immunity and become vulnerable to prosecution for the many laws he had bent or broken. His enemies, especially Cato and the Optimates, eagerly awaited the chance to destroy him. Caesar needed protection. His solution was bold: secure a military command as a provincial governor. A governor with legions under his control enjoyed immunity from prosecution. More importantly, command would bring Caesar the one thing he lacked: military glory on a grand scale. With the backing of Pompey and Crassus, Caesar was appointed governor of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Transalpine Gaul, southern France. These provinces bordered the wild lands of the Gauls, Belgians, and Germans, a frontier both dangerous and full of opportunity. To Caesar, Gaul was not just a borderland, it was a treasure chest waiting to be opened, a land of hundreds of tribes, rich in resources, but divided and unstable. His chance came when the Helvetii, a powerful Celtic tribe from what is now Switzerland, began migrating westward in search of new lands. Their vast movement threatened Rome's allies in Gaul, who appealed to Caesar for aid. Here was the legal pretext he needed. As governor and commander, he had the right to intervene. Caesar marched to intercept the Helvetii. His decision was ruthless. Many historians argue that the Helvetii were less an invading army than a displaced people, men, women, and children, seeking a new homeland. But Caesar saw only an opportunity. Crushing them would give him a great victory to boast of in Rome. And so, in 58 BCE, Caesar confronted and annihilated the Helvetii. His victory was bloody, his motives questionable, but politically it was a triumph. After defeating the Helvetii, many expected Caesar to return to Italy. Instead, he remained in Gaul, claiming that other Roman allies required his help. This allowed him to continue his campaigns without the Senate's explicit approval. Thus began the Gallic Wars, a brutal conquest that would last nearly a decade. With every campaign, Caesar grew richer, his legions more loyal, and his fame in Rome greater. But with each step, he also moved closer to an inevitable showdown with his rivals and with the Republic itself. In the election for consul, the pinnacle of Roman power was finally within Caesar's grasp. The first triumvirate Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus was ready to reshape Roman politics as they pleased. But the consulship lasted only a single year. With so little time, Caesar knew he had to move quickly. His first law was a land reform bill to distribute land to Pompey's veterans, soldiers who had fought and bled for the Republic, yet now lived in poverty. Before the Senate, Caesar argued passionately that Rome owed these men their due, yet fierce opposition arose. The sharpest voice against him was Cato, the younger Caesar's sworn enemy and a leading figure of the conservative Optimates. Cato was a man of strange habits. He dressed in simple, old-fashioned clothing, often barefoot, and claimed to live like Rome's founders. But his austerity masked the fact that he represented the narrow interests of a small aristocratic elite. Cato denounced Caesar's land bill. While admitting it had merits, he warned it set a dangerous precedent. His opposition was not merely political. He despised Caesar personally, particularly because Caesar was rumored to be having an affair with Cato's half-sister, Servilia. Caesar struck back. He ordered his guards to seize Cato and drag him from the Senate. Though Caesar lacked the authority to imprison him for long, the message was unmistakable. Caesar would use force when necessary. The Optimates hated him all the more. Throughout the year, the triumvirs used every tool, legal, illegal, and often violent, to push their agenda. As their domination grew more blatant, people began calling them the three-headed monster. But Caesar's time was running out. Once his consulship ended, he would lose political immunity, leaving him exposed to prosecution for his many controversial actions. His enemies, especially Cato and the Optimates, waited eagerly for their chance to destroy him. Caesar needed protection. His solution, a military command, a provincial governor with legions under his control, was immune from prosecution. Such a command also promised military glory, something Caesar still lacked. And perhaps most importantly, it offered a way out of his crushing debts. With Pompey and Crassus's support, Caesar secured governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Transalpine Gaul, southern France. These border provinces were both strategic and unstable, lying next to the vast, untamed lands of the Gallic tribes. To Caesar, Gaul was a gold mine waiting to be claimed, but also a powder keg of tribal conflict. His opportunity came quickly. The Helvetii, a Celtic tribe from modern Switzerland, began migrating westward, clashing violently with Rome's allies. These allies appealed to Caesar for help. Here was the pretext he needed. As governor and commander, he could intervene legally. Caesar marched his legions to intercept the Helvetii and, in 58 BCE, crushed them decisively. Historians still debate his motives. The Helvetii included many women and children, more refugees than invaders. To some, Caesar's action was ruthless, even barbaric. But in Rome, it was celebrated as a great victory. Instead of returning to Italy after his triumph, Caesar stayed in Gaul. Claiming more allies needed protection, he kept campaigning without Senate approval. But this was no ordinary war. Caesar's soldiers swore loyalty not to the Senate, but to him personally. To pay them, he needed constant conquest. Each victory funded the next. Caesar was trapped in a cycle of expansion and bloodshed he could not stop. For 4 years, he conquered tribe after tribe, using brilliant divide and rule tactics. He allied with some, destroyed others, and then turned on his former allies when convenient. Caesar was clever, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. What set him apart was not only his strategy, but his ability to tell the story. Caesar carefully shaped how his campaigns were reported in Rome. In his commentaries, read aloud to the Roman public, he described himself seizing a shield and charging into battle, painting himself as both general and hero. His writing was vivid, persuasive, almost cinematic. It turned conquest into legend and Caesar into Rome's rising star. But his growing fame terrified the optimates. Cato argued that Caesar had broken Roman law. He claimed Caesar's wars were illegal, that his army was loyal only to him, not to the Republic. He even proposed stripping Caesar of command and handing him over to the Gauls for judgment. For now, Caesar was safe, so long as he remained governor and had the backing of Pompey and Crassus. But soon, fate would change everything. In 54 BCE, tragedy struck. Caesar's only daughter, Julia, the wife of Pompey, died in childbirth. Her death devastated Caesar. She had been his last living tie to his first wife, Cornelia. Politically, it was worse. Julia's marriage had bound Caesar and Pompey together. Now that bond was gone. Soon after, Crassus was killed during his disastrous campaign in Parthia, modern Iran. According to legend, his enemies poured molten gold down his throat, mocking his greed. The first triumvirate collapsed. Caesar stood alone. Without Julia or Crassus, Caesar knew he faced Pompey and the Senate on his own when he returned to Rome. His only hope was to secure overwhelming wealth, glory, and power in Gaul. But Gaul was not yet pacified. In 52 BCE, a charismatic young chieftain arose, Vercingetorix of the Arverni. He united the Gauls, even tribes once allied to Rome, and declared that Caesar had come not as a friend, but as a conqueror. For the first time, Caesar faced his worst nightmare, a united enemy. The greatest battle of his life, and the fate of Rome itself, was about to begin. If Vercingetorix could unite all the Gauls, they would outnumber Caesar's army 10-1. With a population of nearly 5 million, the Gauls posed the greatest threat Rome had ever faced in the region. At first, Vercingetorix waged a campaign of scorched earth and guerrilla warfare, cutting off Caesar's food supplies. For 6 months, he harassed the Romans until both sides were drawn to a decisive confrontation at Alesia. Alesia was a fortified city on a high plateau, defended by some 80,000 Gauls. Caesar judged it too risky to assault directly. Instead, he chose to besiege them, repeating on a massive scale the strategy once used by Crassus against Spartacus. His legions dug trenches, built ramparts, and raised wooden walls over 15 feet high, stretching nearly 10 miles around the city. The plan was simple: starve the Gauls into submission. But Vercingetorix had sent for reinforcements before the siege closed in. As tens of thousands of Gauls marched to relieve the city, Caesar faced disaster. His army was now trapped between two forces, the defenders inside and the relief army outside. Caesar made a decision so audacious many thought it madness. He ordered a second wall, this one facing outward, encircling his own army. The result? Caesar's legions were besieging Alesia while at the same time defending themselves from a siege. Who was trapping whom? When the relief army finally attacked, the Romans heard the terrifying roar of battle cries from outside, while inside Alesia, Vercingetorix launched a full assault. Caesar was surrounded on both sides. At first, the Romans faltered. A section of their wall was broken, and Gauls began pouring through. For a moment it seemed Caesar's gamble would end in total destruction. But Caesar refused to yield. He rode to the front lines, rallying his men. He reminded them that they had defeated barbarians before and would do so again. His presence restored their courage. Still, the situation was desperate. Outnumbered and pressed on all sides, Caesar needed a decisive stroke. He ordered his trusted lieutenant Labienus to hold the broken defenses, while unleashing his cavalry in a surprise maneuver. The Roman cavalry swung wide, attacked from the rear, and threw the Gallic relief army into chaos. Believing themselves surrounded, panic spread. The Romans counterattacked with full force. What had begun as a siege turned into a massacre. After 7 years of war, Gaul was finally subdued. Caesar's conquest of Gaul was one of the most astonishing achievements in military history. With relatively limited resources, he expanded Rome's territory by more than 300,000 square miles, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rhine. But the price was horrific. Caesar himself claimed to have killed 1 million and enslaved another 1 million, Gauls nearly 20% of northern Europe's population. Historians still debate whether this constituted genocide. To the Roman people, Caesar was a hero, the very embodiment of Roman military genius. But to the Senate, he was becoming dangerously powerful. By the late 52nd BCE, Caesar was the most famous man in Rome. That fame made him a target. Cato the Younger and the Optimates argued that Caesar had built a private army loyal only to him, not to the Republic. This, they warned, was the path to tyranny. The first triumvirate had already collapsed. Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, had died in childbirth. Soon after, Crassus was killed in Parthia, allegedly executed by having molten gold poured down his throat in mockery of his greed. Now only Pompey remained, and he began to drift toward Caesar's enemies. In 49 BCE, the Senate, led by Cato, declared Caesar an enemy of the state and demanded he surrender his command. Caesar faced the greatest gamble of his life, disband his army, and return to Rome, where trial and execution were certain, or march on the city itself. At the banks of the Rubicon River, he made his choice. Quoting a line from Greek drama, he declared, "The die is cast." With a single step across the river, Caesar plunged Rome into civil war. Pompey boasted that if he merely stamped his foot, legions would rise from the soil of Italy, but his forces were scattered. Caesar advanced rapidly, welcomed by many towns as a hero. When Pompey and the Senate fled Rome, Caesar pursued them to Greece. The two armies finally clashed at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Though outnumbered, Caesar devised a brilliant counter to Pompey's superior cavalry, hiding infantry among his horsemen to surprise and rout them. The battle ended in a crushing defeat for Pompey, who fled to Egypt. But there, hoping for refuge, he was assassinated. On his 60th birthday, Pompey's head was cut off and his body thrown into the sea. Caesar arrived in Egypt soon after and allied with Queen Cleopatra VII, beginning both a political and personal relationship. They had a son, Caesarion, and Caesar spent months consolidating her rule before returning to Rome. In Rome, Caesar's enemies were not finished. Cato continued resistance in North Africa, but when defeated at Utica, he chose suicide rather than live under Caesar's rule. To many, he became a symbol of liberty against tyranny. By 46 BCE, Caesar returned to Rome in triumph. The Republic now stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. He celebrated a magnificent triumph, his face painted red like Jupiter, the king of the gods. Prisoners of war were executed, including Vercingetorix, who had languished in captivity for 6 years. The people adored him. The Senate, terrified, granted him the title dictator for life. Though Rome had rejected kings for 400 years, Caesar now ruled with greater power than any monarch. He wore the purple cloak of royalty, openly flaunting his authority. He even tested public opinion by having Mark Antony offer him a crown. The crowd shouted it down. Caesar refused, but the symbolism was clear. To many senators, Caesar was no longer a reformer, but a tyrant. Conspirators gathered, calling themselves liberators, determined to restore the Republic. On the 15th of March, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate. A group of senators surrounded him under the pretense of presenting a petition. Suddenly, daggers flashed. Among the assassins was Marcus Junius Brutus, the son of Servilia, Caesar's longtime mistress, and perhaps even Caesar's own illegitimate son. Seeing Brutus strike, Caesar is said to have whispered, "You too, my child?" Moments later, the greatest man of his age lay dead at the foot of Pompey's statue. The conspirators had hoped Caesar's death would restore the Republic. Instead, they unleashed chaos. Mark Antony and Caesar's heir, Octavian, plunged Rome into years of bloody civil war. In the end, Octavian triumphed, becoming Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Republic was gone forever. Caesar was not a king, yet every European monarch who styled himself Kaiser or Tsar claimed descent from his name. His legacy was both glory and terror, a genius of politics, war, and literature, a butcher responsible for genocide, a man whose limitless ambition destroyed the Republic and gave birth to empire. Caesar proved the eternal danger of power, that extraordinary talent often carries extraordinary ambition. And when one man believes he alone holds all the answers, the fall of liberty is only a matter of time. Julius Caesar's story is not merely the tale of a man, it is the tale of Rome itself, its glory, its contradictions, and its downfall. Born into a fading aristocratic family, Caesar rose through danger, debt, and defiance, using charm, cunning, and unmatched determination to carve out his place in history. He gambled with his life at every turn, and for decades the dice seemed always to land in his favor. From the jungles of Gaul to the marble halls of the Senate, he proved himself not only as a soldier and a strategist, but yet greatness and ruin are often bound together. Caesar conquered Gaul and brought unimaginable riches and territory into Rome's orbit. He outmaneuvered rivals like Pompey and humbled the proud aristocrats who despised him. He shattered centuries of tradition by marching across the Rubicon, daring to place himself above the law, and daring Rome to stop him. In doing so, he transformed himself into the most powerful Roman alive, but also sealed his fate. The Republic could not survive a man like Caesar. His victories made him a hero to the masses, but a nightmare to the elite. He offered reforms, handed out land, expanded citizenship, and sought to stabilize a chaotic state. But beneath every gesture of generosity lay an undeniable truth. Caesar wanted more. He wanted power not just for a moment, not just for a term, but for life. And in Rome, a city built on the Ides of March, the blades of 60 senators brought an end to Caesar's life, but not to his influence. As he bled beneath the statue of Pompey, the Republic they claimed to defend bled with him. For in killing Caesar, they did not restore the old order. They only paved the way for the rise of emperors, beginning with his heir, Octavian, who would take the name Augustus and rule. Caesar's legacy is therefore a paradox. He destroyed the republic he claimed to save, but he built the empire that would dominate the world for centuries. His name became a title for emperors, for kings, for rulers far beyond Rome's borders. Even today, echoes of Caesar live on in words like Kaiser and Tsar. He is remembered as both a liberator and a tyrant, a genius and a butcher, a visionary and a destroyer. Perhaps that is why Julius Caesar still fascinates us. His life is a warning and an inspiration, a testament to the heights of human ambition and the depths of human folly. He showed the world that one man, through sheer will, could bend history itself. But he also showed that no amount of power can escape the blade of envy, fear, and betrayal. In the end, Caesar was not a god. He was mortal, brilliant, flawed, and consumed by the very ambition that raised him to greatness. His story reminds us that the line between hero and tyrant is razor thin, and that history's most luminous figures often cast the darkest shadows. And so the dice he cast still roll, echoing through the centuries, in every empire, every leader, every moment when ambition tempts mankind to reach for power without limit. Julius Caesar won his gamble for a time, but in the end, even Caesar could not defeat fate.